Greetings and salutations, everyone. I do hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. Jeff, I'd like to share with you my experience that happened while I was living outside of a rural area called Lakewood, New Mexico in 1999. A little background information: I was 18 at the time. I'd been raised my entire life in the deserts of southeastern New Mexico on two different, very remote ranches. I'm very well versed in the flora and fauna of our state, having spent much of my summers and weekends either doing ranch work or just messing around like kids tend to do. I even used to track animals semi-professionally for hunters and a local trapper. I know the critters around this state. We always lived on very remote ranches, 50, sometimes 75 miles from the nearest actual town. Anyway, my senior year of high school, I moved out on my own. Being part of a school work program, I wanted to live closer to my job and school, living just 12 miles from Artesia, New Mexico, where my school and job were. Seemed like living right in town to me. I guess it all starts April of '99. My boyfriend and I at the time were rooming with a couple in their home just outside of Lakewood, New Mexico. We rented a room from them and sometimes watched their two kids as part of our rental agreement. For a few months before that April, a lot of the neighboring landowners had been complaining about wild dogs coming up from the river and harassing their dogs and scaring their livestock. We were about a mile from the Pecos River, and wild dogs have indeed been a problem in the area. But this seemed a little more intense. There was even property damage being reported, with one guy, a few properties down, having his chicken coop completely destroyed a few weeks earlier. The couple we lived with had two dogs, both of them medium-sized terrier mixes, and neither of them were on the cowardly side. But they had been getting very skittish about going outside at night, so much so that we had to make sure they went out right at sunset and again at sunrise, because they would not leave the house otherwise at night. It was all very strange. One night at around 11 p.m., it was a Saturday because I didn't have work or school. The four of us were sitting around watching TV and BSing about different stuff when the dogs, who were asleep in the master bedroom on the far east side of the house, started growling and barking. This was unusual behavior for them, so we all got up to see what was going on. It seemed as if they were barking at the windows. By the time the four of us had piled into the bedroom, the dogs had shifted their barking away from the window and seemed to be barking at the wall. Well along the wall, really, like they could smell or sense something was there, but it was moving. It was very abnormal behavior for any dog, but especially these dogs. I'd never heard them bark the entire time I had been renting. Even stranger, when they came to the end of the room, basically in the corner, their barking went crazy, like really crazy, and that's when things got really scary. Suddenly, from what felt like further down the wall, about where the kitchen was, we all heard this loud thump and kind of a scuffle sound. And what's worse is we actually felt it. It kind of shook the entire trailer home, which was not small for an 18 by 80 trailer home. The dogs at this point had just completely freaked out. They cried out in a high-pitched whine and just scrambled under the bed. The lady who I had rented from tried to coax them out for a second, but then when we felt that thump and could hear that scratching noise again, so we all ran out of the bedroom down the hall into the kitchen to see what was up. But peering out of the kitchen window was pointless. It was late, no cloud cover, and no moon. You just couldn't see anything. A few moments later, we heard that scuffling noise again and went into the living room because that is where it seemed to be coming from. We were really confused at this point, but also a little freaked out. There was sort of an electricity in the air, and when we talked about it later, we all agreed that it felt like something was off. The next few moments after this seemed to happen in slow motion, and I will never forget it. It is seared into my brain. Appearing in the living room window from the left and looking right in on us from that glass was what I can only describe as a Dogman. Its shoulders were quite human with short, sleek hair, and it had the head of what looked like a slender Rottweiler with palish yellow eyes. It also had collarbones, and dogs do not have human collarbones. The teeth, oh my God, these teeth. They hung out of its mouth at least 2 inches and looked sharp. All 4 of us gasped and pulled away. I'm not ashamed to say that I screamed a little. There was only a couple of feet and some cheap glass between us. But I guess the noise and commotion had scared it off because it just disappeared from view, almost like it had melted. That image is forever seared into my brain, though. Also, of note, keep in mind this is a trailer home, so the bottom of that window is easily 6 feet off the ground, meaning this thing was 7 to 8 feet. No matter how big a dog or wolf is, it could not have stood up and looked in on us like that. The guys, being guys, immediately grabbed their shotguns and headed out the door, even though we told them that it was a bad idea. Super dark desert night, big unknown critter. Huh. I guess they were out there looking around for a bit, some 20 minutes before they came back inside and said they couldn't see anything. The light from the house shining on it, and it being so close to the window, were the only reasons we saw it in the first place. None of us really slept that night. We just felt so creepy. The next morning I got up early and decided to have a look around to see if it had left any tracks to identify what this thing was. The grass and weeds that were right beside the house were pretty much hid any kind of tracks that it had made, although I did find where it looked as if something had clawed the siding along the bottom of the house in a couple places, making the thump and scuffling noises we heard from the night before make sense. It had been trying to claw its way into the house from under the house. I then decided to follow the tracks the guys had made, and that was when I made a second, very unnerving discovery. The guys made clear tracks in the sandy dirt, and whatever it was did as well, because it was pretty much circling them the entire time they were out there. The tracks were huge and canine, with deep nail gouges, meaning this thing had a wicked set of claws. But the tracks switched back and forth from 4 tracks to 2, meaning it was walking bipedally, and then quadruped. I felt my blood turn to ice in that moment. That thing could have torn them apart at any second, and they had been clueless. I did not rent that room very much longer after that. I actually moved 2 weeks later, just before graduation, because as stressful as a move was at that point, it was less stressful wondering if a monster is looking through that windows at me while I'm asleep. Wow, what a terrifying encounter that was. That fear that those people must have been feeling that night. I mean, Yeah, it was 18 feet by 80 feet long, but 18 feet by 18 or 18 by 80, well, you're boxed in by a creature that you can tell is, I mean, it shook the home. And then to the next day go outside and realize that your significant other and his friend went out that night before looking around, but then you see tracks that had been circling them 20 to 30 feet away. And then to realize that they are not only quadruped, but bipedal. That is absolutely terrifying. And I cannot blame this person for wanting to move. I can't. I mean, God. I think I would move as well. You know, you're supposed to feel safe in your home. There's one thing being out in the woods and seeing these things, but when they come up to your home, it's a whole different kind of terror. Anyway, on to today's second encounter. This happened back when I was 10 years old, the summer of 1979. Looking back, I had an ideal childhood, which is quite rare now. I'm from the Triad area of North Carolina, from an area that is relatively rural at the time. I was pretty much a free-range kid. So long as I was home for supper, there were no problems. Much of my time was spent playing in the woods and creeks within a mile or so from my house. Naturally, being a bit of a country boy, I was obsessed with hunting, fishing, guns, bows and arrows, and especially deer hunting. I read hunting magazines like crazy, soaking up everything I could about habits of whitetail, from when and where they moved, and to what they ate depending on the time of year. Furthermore, I learned their seasonal diet and how to read deer signs from rubs, scrapes, spoor, and finding their trails. The experience I wish to share didn't occur in North Carolina, but up in Virginia. It is a memory that haunts me yet, and is something I will never be able to forget. As much as I enjoyed the woods and creeks of my home, my grandmother's place in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia was special. That was wilderness compared to the woods by my home. Her land in Carroll County was on a ridge about 1.5 hours from my house. It was just a 3-room cabin without year-round running water. When the weather was good enough from an unpaved mountain road to be drivable, we were there most weekends. I would spend most of the day roaming across that mountain from top to ridge to the river below. The nearest neighbor was about a mile away on state-maintained gravel road, but even then most of the homes in the area were vacation homes and normally empty. It was a Saturday, June. School was out for the summer. We'd go up on a Friday evening, come back Saturday night. My grandmother was a very devout and probably as sincerest Christian I've ever known. Anyway, it was a Saturday morning and I had the entire day to explore that mountain. By this time, I had a fairly decent grasp of the habits of the local deer population. Deer were most active at dawn and dusk, and when under pressure, such as heavy hunting pressure, will become mostly nocturnal unless in rut. But this was June, and hunting season was months away, and the rut was a couple months after that. So I made my plans to explore the creek by following it to the river, then follow the river upstream to a big rock, then hike up a rather steep mountain back to the cabin, stopping for a rest at a shallow cave, then make it back to the cabin about noon to have something to eat. Then I'd have to help my grandmother garden for a few hours. As you can imagine, it was a busy morning and afternoon, but at 10 years old there was endless energy, and I had decided to take my binoculars and watch a recent timbered patch of land at the top of the ridge once my chores were done. I set off with a promise to be back before it had gotten dark. The only real agricultural in that mountain was raising beef cattle, hay, silage, and some cabbage. The apple orchards were mostly on the southern side of the Blue Ridge, near tourist areas. Most of what the deer ate around my grandmother's cabin at the time of year would have been tree or perennial browse, and any annuals, such as pokeweed and other green leafy plants. They would also obviously eat any berries that started to come up at about that time. There were a few hours of daylight remaining when I took off up the road with my binoculars and canteen of spring water. The wind had been blowing favorably all day. For those who don't know, while you may fool a deer's eyes, you can't fool his nose. The wind decides pretty much everything when it comes to hunting deer. On this day, the wind was favorable. It was blowing at a crosswind to me when overlooking the cleared little valley. The cleared land went down to the creek and had been timbered the previous winter. It was lush with new growth for deer to feast upon, but it was still low enough for any adult deer would be visible from my vantage point at the top of the ridge. The other side of the creek remained in timber and thick rhododendron thicket. I'd gotten settled in a couple of good hours before dusk. I wanted to be there in plenty of time for the woods to calm down for my walk to my spot long before the deer came out. I didn't want to spook any deer on the walk in. As I said, I settled into my spot and made it as comfortable as I could and constructed a rough blind by placing some leafy branches into the ground to break up my outline, which took maybe 10 minutes. I stretched out and scanned the clear-cut area below, double-checking the likely areas I expected deer to come out of the woods into this clearing and browse. Then I just rested, enjoying the pleasant evening, watching birds and small animals. After about an hour and a half, the sun started to set, and I took one last drink of water until it got dark. Suddenly there was a bit of movement to my right. After scanning the area with my binoculars, I saw that it was a deer and a new fawn. The doe paused at the edge of the clearing to make sure that it was safe, while occasionally checking her back trail. It then slowly moved out into a clearing, quickly followed by the fawn. It was a large doe with one fawn, which was not a surprise since older people tend to have one fawn, while younger does more often have two fawns. Older deer tend to have one fawn, while younger does more often have two fawns. But the two deer were not alone. Another deer followed them. The three deer slowly worked their way up the creek, eating browse. As they did so, the doe would pause to allow her fawn to suckle. It was then that I noticed some movement on the opposing hillside. The rhododendron thicket would move. Something large was slowly working its way down that hillside. The rhododendron thicket was especially thick, and while I could not see what was moving through it, its movement caused the thicket itself to move. I assumed that it was another deer. By this time, it was close to being dark. The three deer had taken about 30 minutes to work their way up to the little creek from where they had exited the woods. The expected deer that I had assumed had come through the rhododendron thicket had never left that thicket and crossed the creek, though, which led me to believe that it was an old buck, since they are usually a lot more cautious. Now, it's almost dark. Fortunately, though, my binoculars gathered much more light. My binoculars magnified and made everything brighter. If I were not using binoculars, I would have never seen what had happened next. Often since then, I wish I didn't have my binoculars that day, and that I had left earlier. What I saw next has never left me since. The three deer reached the spot close to the last spot that I had seen movement through the rhododendron thicket. Just a moment after the deer once again checked the back trail, there was sudden commotion from that thicket. It was a large animal that leapt out of the thicket, clearing that small creek. The doe was taken down in an instant. What appeared to be a large wolf had the doe's throat in its powerful jaws. Astounded, I watched what appeared to be a wolf killing its prey. Besides the fact that there hadn't been any wolves in Virginia for about 150 years, I noticed that there was something wrong. Something else was wrong. The wolf's proportions appeared wrong. Its front legs were far too long. The upper torso was too broad to be that of a canine, but then it only became more strange. As the wolf's jaws crushed the windpipe of the doe, I noticed that its front paws were not paws at all. They appeared to be more like hands than paws. Paws which were then holding down the deer in its death rattle. As the wolf-like animal dropped the deer from its jaws, it fell to the ground. The night action is what left me confused until this day. The animal raised from a crouching position and stood on its hind legs to its full height, I guess 7 feet. It looked around, including in my direction. It sniffed the air as it did so. Fortunately, the wind had steadied, and I was not downwind from it. I froze in terror. It didn't see me. As the light faded, I could tell that the beast was grayish in color. Its fur was thicker around its neck and down its back. Its muzzle was pronounced. Its hind legs were too short in comparison to the front. While it was muscular, it was not overly so. The creature began to tear into the doe with its teeth. It was then I decided that a silent retreat was the most sensible thing. All I can say is I was ever so glad that I had made a decent blind to conceal my retreat, so that I was able to retreat unseen and relatively quiet. It was also fortunate that the beast was distracted by its meal. I returned to my grandmother's cabin under the constant fear of a brutal death. I had never been happier to leave my grandmother's cabin. That was the last time I had ever went there. My grandmother was not one to walk far from the cabin. I attempted to dissuade her from going there as much. Her health began to fail. Not long afterward, and her trips became less frequent as the years passed. We sold the land and the cabin after my grandmother passed away. It was only a few years ago that I learned what I had witnessed that evening was a Dogman. The beast had been active prior to dusk, and I don't believe that a person turns into a beast. That's my experience. I don't know if that Dogman I saw or one of its kind still roams those hills, but if you're ever in Carroll County, Virginia, please be careful. Wow. That experience reminds me of the hunters that were hunting up in British Columbia. And they were like on a ridge themselves. And they were just resting and watching some elk. And all of a sudden they saw this huge, what they thought was a timber wolf at first, come out of the clearing and kind of sideways cut. The elk were not aware of it until the final last second, and it attacked and pounced. And then it ended up carrying the elk over its shoulders like a sack of potatoes. That experience reminded me of that one very much so. Very terrifying too as well. I mean, you're a young kid, obsessed with the woods, and then you see something like that. I don't think you're going out into the woods too much after that, which he didn't. And, that stinks because that love of the outdoors, the love of nature now is I guess, taken away from you. And that should never happen, ever. Anyway, let's move on to the third encounter. This is my experience and a little bit about me. It happened quite a while ago, and I will try to use as much as the conversation that I remember between myself, my other deputy, and Fish and Game. Here's a little bit about me. In high school, I used to be a fun guy. I played football and wrestled. Before I graduated, like everyone, I thought my future was to play football for the University of Ohio and then to the NFL. Well, that all changed after my dad passed away. After Dad's passing, I'm not going to lie, I kind of gave up on life. Then, one day, 6 months after I graduated, I run into an old football buddy. He had joined the Marines, and we start talking. A week later, I contact the recruiter. Fast forward, 8 years later, I land a job at the local sheriff department as a deputy in my home state. Well, the first few months went by pretty fast, and I was living life like the time before I joined the Marines. Then one night, I get a call about a missing person and go check it out. I drop by the house, and this older woman walks out with a double-barrel shotgun next to her hips. She says in a rude southern accent, sounding like she was a heavy smoker, "About time you showed up. My husband's been gone for 2 days now." She tells me that her husband went rabbit hunting the day before, and she was getting worried about him, and that it's not like him to be gone this long without contacting her. I proceed to get her info and his and head out to the location that he had been hunting at. On my way out, I contact Fish and Game and the station to see if they'd send another deputy out. Hopefully we can find this guy before nightfall. By the time I get there, there's the deputy and the Fish and Game standing by the guy's truck. I jump out and notice that I know both of them. We talk for a couple of minutes about what we're going to do and then head out. Now, this is where I loved being in the military. I was following this guy's tracks about a half a mile. We came to an open field, and then we came across a dead deer that clearly had been shot out of season. Poachers. This guy's going to get himself arrested, game warden says. I said, yeah, and I look at the deer closer, and it looked like it had been ripped to shreds. Coyotes, other deputies said. Probably, the game warden stated. Coyotes don't do this much damage, only in one day. Then I look over and I see a huge dog print next to the deer. I don't think anything other than maybe it's this guy's hunting dog. Boy, was I wrong. After leaving the deer, we walk back into the woods, and just a little down the hill I see something sticking up, laying next to a tree. I look closer. Look, it's the guy. I smile and make my way up to him. I see him shaking. He still has his gun in his hand. I calmly call out, "We're here to help you, sir." He turns slowly, still shaking, and then turns back around. I walk around the tree and I see a horrible sight. The man's hunting dog looked like it had been half eaten by something. "What did this?" I asked. "A very big wolf." "Sir, there haven't been wolves in Ohio in a while," one of my partners said. "Yeah, you're right." Then he stands up with his dog in hands, completely forgetting about his gun, and says, "Please, let's get out of here." We make it back to our truck and call the EMT to pick the guy up and make sure there's nothing wrong. My partners and I talk about what we thought happened to his dog. Then we hear this blood-curdling howl. We draw our guns and get ready because the howl sounded like it was yards from us. And then we hear this thing come storming towards us, and it stops. It becomes quiet. No bugs, no birds. It's a pretty still day, and it's still kind of bright, almost dusk. Then we hear this thing start to growl as it becomes a little closer. We can't see through the woods too good, but we could see this red eye shine. Then I take a shot because I clearly know this is not an animal nor a human. We hear a big yelp and a small growl. We need to go after it, the game warden screams. "Screw you, man, I'm not going after that thing. It takes 40 rounds of a .40 Smith & Wesson. I yell back. We get into a bit, then I say, "I'm out of here," and leave. So did the other deputy, but as for the game warden, I haven't seen him again yet, so I don't know if he went after the thing we had shot that night or not. I did do a tour in Afghanistan in the Corps, and I've seen things I don't ever want to see, and it takes a lot to scare me, but whatever this thing was almost made me quit my job and lock myself in my house for the rest of my life. After trying to figure out what we heard and saw that night, I've come to the conclusion that it definitely wasn't a Bigfoot, maybe a Dogman, but I'm not an expert on these things. It doesn't matter because I love protecting and helping people. That's why I joined the military and proceeded to join law enforcement. And as long as someone is screaming for help, you'll see them running no matter the danger. You'll see me running no matter the danger. Also, the Fish and Game officer is alive. We just haven't spoken in years. That's pretty crazy. I'm not law enforcement, but I always thought that as law enforcement, and I'm not doubting this guy's experience because I wasn't there, you know. But as law enforcement, and I know I have a few subscribers that are law enforcement or former Leo, don't you have to identify what you're shooting at? I mean, you don't shoot blindly into woods because you hear growling and see red eye shine. Maybe you can, maybe it was different circumstances because of the deer being shredded, the dog being shredded. I'm not sure. Once again, I'm not doubting this guy because I wasn't there, but I'm asking, because I always thought there was a certain protocol to discharging your service weapon. Anyway, I'm no expert. I'm just bringing it up. Tonight's final encounter. This is not my experience, but a woman's experience in Michigan, just up north from Montcalm County. I never knew her. In fact, I heard this experience from my dad, and my dad read about it in the paper. So, the experience takes place at a cabin in the woods. The woman was there alone at the time. It was sometime at night, and suddenly she started to hear sniffing coming from the window and front door. Confused at what it could be, she opens the window and looks. And to her right, she is horrified. She sees a dog-like face staring at her, right into her face. She is looking right into its eyes, and it is looking into hers. She gets scared and freaked out and goes to grab a gun. By now, she starts hearing this clawing and scratching at the door. It was loud, and she fired the gunshot through her roof to scare it away, and for her sake, it had worked. It was no longer there. The scratching had stopped. She ends up calling the police after what had just happened. They arrive on site at the cabin. By the time they got there, nothing was there. There was a hole in the roof from the bullet she had shot. But what's most concerning and scary was the fact that there was a huge and unnatural scratch marks going all the way down her front door on the outside. There were hundreds of claw marks on her outside door. The police had never seen anything like it. And the woman explained everything that had just happened. The sound of the claws, the dog's face in the window, the sniffing around the window and door. They were shocked, and the police said that no human could ever do anything like that. It was soon reported and had made its way to some newspapers around Michigan, but it didn't seem to be shown on the news too much. And I haven't seen any newspapers about Dogman, so I thought I would share this experience with you. I'm very sure that the newspaper is still out there, but I think it's rare.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting this channel. After all, it is your support that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.